Now we're skipping a little bit of the story, the Last Supper, because we're going to make that available on Maundy Thursday and do that bit, as it were, in real time. So we're now skipping to just after the Last Supper and the Garden of Gethsemane.
Luke chapter 22, reading from verse 39. Jesus came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Thanks be to God.
Your will be done. The question of suffering has always been a thorny one for those who believe in a loving God. The Bible doesn't offer any neat, ready answer to the question. And to be honest, I'm quite glad it doesn't. I think I would find any simplistic answer to the question of suffering rather insulting. Any easy answer can only ever in some way diminish the reality of the experience of suffering. It is worth remembering, however, that even Jesus seems to get angry at the question of suffering. And yet somehow he never loses faith in his Father. He's always able to trust him. And even now, as he faces the most appalling suffering, his friends and all those closest to him will betray him, so he will undergo the most appalling emotional suffering. He will go through the most appalling physical torture. He will go through spiritual suffering as he reaches that moment where even his relationship with his Father is broken as he faces his own death. But nonetheless, he faces it all with faith and hope and love. Those three things will never die. And in Luke's Gospel particularly, we get a very strong sense that Jesus doesn't exactly know what's coming. He doesn't know with crystal clear foresight that he's going to rise again from the dead in 3 days' time. He simply trusts his Father, that somehow things will work out in the end, because that's what doing his Father's will means for him. And that in the end, the suffering that he will undergo will not diminish him or destroy him. Human beings have always had a very difficult relationship with suffering. A long accustomed position at the head of the food chain has given the impression to our minds that we shouldn't have to suffer, that suffering is for lesser mortals, something we inflict rather than something we have to undergo. And yet the suffering of Jesus shows us that that cannot be true, that suffering is not for lesser mortals, it is even for the Son of God himself. In the biblical tradition there are various ways in which suffering is interpreted. There is one strand of theology that says that healing is a necessary part of growth. You can't create something new without tearing that which already is, and that must inevitably involve suffering. By the same token, healing is also a form of suffering, as when a bone knits together, it creates a new kind of pain, but nonetheless it is the pain of healing rather than the festering pain of infection. There is also a sparingly used strand which says that suffering is inflicted by God for our punishment and for our good. Now that one requires particularly careful handling. The Bible is very clear that God uses that very sparingly, that he does it always within the context of a deep relationship, like a father and a child, correcting the child and preventing them from undergoing serious harm. The Bible is also very clear that God does it in a way that is gentle and kind for our own good, and that he does not inflict on us more than we can bear. And it's very important not to jump to conclusions that God is himself inflicting suffering for purposes of his own. That is very sparingly used in the Bible. But by far the most common explanation in the Bible is that suffering is not what God inflicts on us, but rather what we bring on ourselves by our own choices. That suffering was not what God intended, but rather it is a symptom of a broken and fallen world, a world that is no longer living under God's will and purposes because we have made a critical choice. Instead of saying to God, "Your will be done," we have said, "My will be done." And God, honouring us with free will and with significant lives, allows us to live with the consequences of our decision. He allows us to make real decisions that really matter and that have real consequences. But the catastrophic effect of so many of our bad decisions has created suffering not only for ourselves but for the whole world in a way that is no longer fair or just. And these are not what God wills, but rather what we will. So the beginning process of our healing has to involve us changing that decision and saying, instead of "my will be done," "God, your will be done." Now Jesus makes this decision for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like us, he is tempted to make the decision, "my will be done," and to preserve himself from a suffering that he doesn't want to face. But for Jesus, as for all of us, to try to delay or avoid suffering inevitably only makes matters worse. So whatever it costs him, he is willing to say, "But your will, not mine, be done." And therein lies the beginning of our healing that will find its final working out on the cross as Jesus takes upon himself the consequences of all our catastrophic decisions. But what about for us? Saying to God, "Your will be done," is costly, as we instinctively know, which is why we would much rather say, "My will be done." It places us entirely in God's hands, but that actually is the best place for us to be. Because when we are in God's hands, though it won't stop us from suffering, we do know that Jesus inhabits our suffering with us, that he's with us every step of the way, and that with Jesus as our companion in our suffering, it will never destroy us or diminish us or have the last word in our existence. So whatever it may cost, Lord, your will be done.